Hey guys, what is going on? It is me, BakuriBox12 here, and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God Dungeon Guide video. It's time. Without a doubt, my most heavily requested video, the Shatters Guide, is finally here, whether or not you still need it. Before I get started, there are some things I want to make very clear. First, if anyone watching this has not seen GHCD's Shatters Guide, I recommend you do so at some point to get a second opinion, because there will be things that he mentions there that I won't hear, and vice versa. Also, I'm fully aware that there are plenty of other players who are more qualified and know more information about the Shatters than I do. There always will be. But that's kind of the point. I've always been proof that you don't need to be anything special to succeed in Realm of the Mad God. You can be a perfectly average player with basic knowledge and still complete difficult dungeons. This guide will be as informative as it needs to be for those players. How to efficiently complete the Shatters and how to keep it clean. That's what I'm here to talk about. Let's not waste any more time. Roll the tape. Roll the tape! The Shatters is one of the hardest and most intricate dungeons in the game, although some people make it look easy. It drops from the Avatar of the Forgotten King, a once-per-realm event god shaped like a skull that takes a massive beating and goes through several phases before being killed. Avoiding the orange confusing stars is your biggest concern, and they added a new status effect called Unstable, which ruins your accuracy by making you frantically point in different directions. I don't want to get too into it for the sake of time, just be sure to optimize your movements as well as you can, and if you're lucky, it'll drop a portal that takes you to the Shatters. Okay, so if you had to take one thing away from this video, and nothing more, it would be what I'm about to tell you, because this first room teaches you everything that you need to know about the Shatters. The spawn room is completely safe with a switch at the top in front of a blocked off wall. By destroying it, the next room will open, and that's the first thing that this dungeon teaches you. Destroying switches allows you to move on to following areas. Then we have the main courtyard, and this is what makes or breaks a clean Shatters. Players who have no idea what they're doing are gonna run straight down the middle, which makes sense. You see a path in front of you, you run forward. That's the opposite of what you want to do in a Shatters. This is one of, if not the only dungeons to not be procedurally generated, meaning the enemy spawns are all set from the moment you enter. There are tons of enemies placed in specific spots on the map to prevent you from just running through. Not to mention the first boss is blocked off until all 5 switches are destroyed, so there's no way to rush it and you can't even teleport to other players. They really want you to take your time here and work together, which is a good thing. Now, while the enemy placements are fixed, the type of enemies is not. It is randomly chosen from a selection of formations, and that's the second thing that this dungeon teaches you. Depending on your luck, you can have an easy time or a really hard time. You can use the minimap to try and get a sneak peek of what's to come, but that doesn't change what you're dealing with. So with 5 switches that need destroyed and are surrounded by various high-level enemies, that raises the question, how do you keep a Shatters clean? Hug every wall that you see. You can only draw aggro to enemies by getting close to them. Shooting in their direction does nothing. Even a trickster's decoy won't activate them, which I found really surprising. Then, inch your way forward until you lure one enemy towards the group and take it out. In large numbers, these enemies can be devastating, but with only one against even a small group of competent players, it's very simple, and that's the third thing that this opening room teaches you. Lure enemies one by one. If you can remember all 3 of these things, then you're in good shape. But this guide is far from over. The 2 main types of enemies are classified as towers and mages. Titanum is a mossy stone tower with a lot of health but no attacks. Instead, it acts as a spawner for stone knights and mages. Stone knights are deceptively frightening enemies because they quickly charge you with a paralyze attack. During your first outing, you may get jump scared by these knights and be tempted to Nexus for fear of getting popped, but I'm happy to report that that won't be the case. Their shots only deal 5 damage and the paralyze lasts 0.7 seconds. The only time these enemies are remotely dangerous, even for unmaxed players, is if you get paralyzed while being attacked by other enemies, like the Stone Mage, which is a much bigger cause for alarm. It has 2 shot patterns. In fact, most enemies in the Shatters have 2 patterns and or shots that they alternate between, one of which is the dominant phase where white bullets will be fired in a distinct but awkward to dodge wavy pattern. I tend to back up and avoid them from a distance, but there is a sweet sweet spot that you can stand in to remain safe, and it's insanely helpful, but if you're a few pixels off, you could take massive damage. There is a secondary phase where it'll fire wavy but more narrow shots all around with a damage range of 80 to 105, all while being invulnerable. Alternatively, there will be times where the mage won't attack at all, instead throwing spikes at a good distance that cause damage when being walked over. Now, it says it does 120 piercing damage to a player, but I've walked over one as a maxed priest and received stacked shots of 82, dropping nearly 500 health, so I don't really know what to believe. It could have been multiple spikes stacked on each other that landed on me. Either way, as long as you don't walk over them, they can easily be destroyed or ignored. However, these enemies will continue to infinitely spawn with no cap on how many can be alive at one time. So I advise taking these out as quickly as you can. Piercing classes are very helpful in this regard. Oh, and for some reason, if you go invisible next to a tower, it causes the minions to overspawn on top of each other, creating stacked shots and way more enemies than you would want to deal with, so don't do that. The other tower is known as a Paladin Obelisk, a beefy tank with a lot more health and defense, plus a self-armoring effect that can make it a pain to kill quickly. Like the Titanum, it spawns minions of its own called Stone Paladins. However, there can only be 6 alive at one time, and the invisibility overspawn rule still applies. That being said, while their slow movement and base damage is nothing too frightening, due to their high HP, defense, and frequent invulnerability in between attacks, these can pile up quickly and overwhelm you if your group doesn't have substantial DPS. It's for this reason that paladins and warriors are so valued. Now we have the mages, and this is where the bulk of the enemies are found. The 3 types you can encounter are regular mages, adepts, and archmages, and they'll come in a red or blue variation. Typically, the rule is that red is better than blue because generally speaking, reds are weaker, but that doesn't mean that you'll never run into any trouble with one. Everything here hits hard regardless of color. An additional thing to note is that all red mages can be stunned, but not paralyzed. Blue mages, however, can be paralyzed, but not stunned. So when playing as a knight or an archer, be sure to pay attention to the color of the mage that you're fighting so that you can make full use of your ability. The fire mage is one of the easier enemies to take out. In its first phase, it'll fire a 3-shot wide spread that I can only describe as a volcanic flamethrower that hits for 85 apiece. If kept alive, it'll begin moving in an erratic, unpredictable pattern, sporadically releasing fireballs with a 100 to 130 damage range that cause unstable and quiet. Thankfully, drawing aggro to them while walking backwards will allow you to remain completely out of their range and attack them at the same time, even as a melee. With enough damage, these become the easiest enemies, bar none. And you know, the same thing could be said for the Forgotten Ice Mage, which is pretty much the same enemy with a few changes. For starters, it has a blue boomerang crescent attack that hits for 130 and inflicts slow and darkness upon the player. Slow is a given, it is an ice attack after all, but darkness is one of the most unique status effects in the game. It darkens the entire screen save for a small area around your character, limiting your visibility. Now, the obvious disadvantage here is that you can't see anything. You don't know where all of the enemies are, and in a dungeon like the Shatters, that can be pretty terrifying. You feel like at any moment something could jump out and instantly kill you, and that would be a logical assumption to make. But darkness is a weird effect. If there are enemies present outside of your field of vision, but you can't see them, then they can't hurt you. You could be getting absolutely destroyed by minions on everyone else's screen, but if you don't see any of it, then it doesn't happen. Now, if an enemy gets close enough and becomes visible, then the threat is very much real again, but you can use darkness as a tool to survive way longer than you normally would under similar circumstances. But back to the Ice Mage, the same strategy as before still applies. In fact, I highly recommend that you kill it as fast as you can, because if it reaches phase 2, it will stop moving, glow for a moment, tear open a portal to hell, and summon the Ice Sphere, one of the most diabolically overpowered enemies in the entire game. A majority of the time, it'll circle around the Ice Mage, but at any given moment when you least expect it, it will try to jump directly on top of you. The problem? It behaves like a concentrated Leviathan, a seemingly infinite number of attacks that can deal anywhere from 75 to 150 damage. Simply grazing your shoulder up against this monster is enough to drop you to half health. Imagine if it sat on you.
Sounds like my cue.
Timmy, I swear to God, I'm gonna— The Ice Sphere is notorious for eliminating players all across the board in the blink of an eye. When this beast pops out, everyone enters panic mode because you never know when it could strike. However, it can be paralyzed and stunned, both of which are incredibly helpful, but more often than not, a ranged character will destroy it from afar, and you can also wait for it to self-destruct. Be warned though, when this happens, the attack it lingers does 300 damage apiece, potentially killing even maxed characters in 2 or 3 hits. Also, if the Ice Mage is still alive, it won't take long for it to spawn another sphere, so it's in your best interest to kill it as quickly as possible. Sentinel. The fire adept isn't much harder, to be honest. It's got a fireball attack, a radial burst, and he's kind of fast, but his damage isn't very remarkable, and the unstable and quiet that they inflict doesn't impair your movement at all. As long as you employ the same technique as before, they shouldn't be able to touch you. Phase 2 is where things can get a little hairy. It spawns a fire portal, a stationary enemy with a very narrow counterclockwise stream of fireballs that, to my detriment, cause 4 seconds of confusion and 150 damage. If you feel like being a ninja and want to try to weave in between the attacks, be my guest. It's possible, but destroying these should be top priority. There's a 1-second delay after landing before they attack, and they can be stunned, so keep that in mind. The Ice Adept, however, is my least favorite enemy. It has a rapid-fire ice attack for 150 that causes slow, preventing you from dodging anymore, and darkness. And as an added bonus, it has a secondary purple star attack that confuses for 3 seconds. Even if you know how to confuse control, that doesn't mean you'll be able to switch between the two control schemes quickly enough. That's where the challenge lies. I find that pulling it towards a wall is really helpful, as it restricts its movement to a linear path, making it super easy to hit. Otherwise, it'll keep dancing around until you kill it. Like its fiery counterpart, it will spawn an ice portal if kept alive. It behaves exactly the same, damage included, but it slows instead of confuses, which is way more forgiving. Despite falling under the blue category, ice portals can actually be stunned. And like the fire portal, it'll self-destruct if it happens to be alive for over a minute. Lastly, we have the Archmages, or Grandpas as we like to call them. The Archmage of Flame is, strangely, one of my favorite enemies conceptually. It'll chase the nearest player until it's 5 or 6 tiles away and then stand still to shoot fire missiles in a very specific 45-degree pattern. They hit for 110 and cause quiet and unstable, but I like this phase because it feels like a genuine challenge. It's an enemy that's not too overpowered and has a recognizable pattern that can be learned. In its second phase, it'll throw out a number of firebombs that explode after flashing. Now these can easily kill you if you walk over them, but there's plenty of time to get to safety after they land, so they're not much of an issue. The Glacier Archmage is, in my opinion, the most annoying enemy. It has 2 somewhat hard-hitting attacks, but it likes to keep away from players at a 7 to 8 tile distance, and anyone who tries to get closer will cause the Archmage to move away and maintain its distance. This means that the only way to hit it is to either lure it into a corner where it can't move, or have a ranged class take it out. But even then, there's a stray bullet that doesn't do any damage, but causes unstable, making it impossible to hit your target. This is where you need someone to stand in front and tank the bullet for the ranged class. Once that's taken care of, it's all a matter of patience. And that does it for all the enemy types. Really, as long as you drag one enemy at a time, your group should never feel overwhelmed or be forced to Nexus. You would think that a high-level dungeon like this would require you to have maxed out characters, but on the contrary, I think it's way more beneficial to bring a throwaway character that you don't care about losing, so that you don't have to feel all stressed out about being killed. I highly recommend the Paladin, as its ability gives a party effect for damaging and healing, allowing the group to quickly kill enemies and recover health. The same goes for Warrior, because the Berserk really helps with DPS, especially for the first boss. Wizard is an overall good pick for its range and damage, and its Spellbomb is useful for hitting switches over walls. I also found Mystics to be extremely helpful if things get out of hand. Stasising enemies can buy everyone time to recuperate and lighten the load on how many things are trying to kill you at once. And of course, priests are always appreciated. Long range, continuous healing, never a bad call. So, the first main objective of the Shatters is to make it to the Bridge Guardian, the Forgotten Sentinel. As I said earlier, the only way to open the bridge is to destroy all 5 switches scattered throughout the courtyard, allowing you to make good use of the wall hugging technique. In fact, it's so useful I found myself using it in real life. The first switch is off to the right and the second is on the left. Second switch is really easy because by sticking to the perimeter, you won't need to come into contact with a single enemy. Walk up, kill the switch, and carefully backtrack to the right. Now, contrary to the random enemy spawn rule, there will always be a Titanum tower at first switch, meaning your strategy will be consistent among multiple Shatters runs. If someone knows the sweet spot or can tank the bullets, then everybody can run in, kill the tower, and get the switch. If things go awry and the tower overspawns, making everyone too scared to go in, then an alternate method that you can try involves a group member baiting the enemies to stay in the bottom corner of the room while the rest of the group runs up from behind and kills the tower and switch. Third switch can be a little trickier. There's a gap in the wall that you can shoot through to hit the switch, but you have to make sure that you don't get too close to the nearby spawn. I should note that if at any point in time the group feels too pressured to play under these tight conditions, you can always clear out the enemies one by one. It'll take longer for sure, but you'll be able to move around freely. Fourth switch can easily be taken care of if you have a wizard or an assassin who can throw damage over walls. Without these classes, you will need to do some extra clearing to reach the switch. It's a common strategy strategy to go straight to the 5th and clear over back to the 4th? The building structures can be used to block enemy projectiles if need be. Either way, 5th switch almost always requires the group to drag some enemies. There are plenty of cases where a ranged class can take out the switch without activating the enemies, and then have everyone rush past, outrunning the now activated mages or tower. If the group isn't confident enough to do this, then drag and clear the enemies one at a time to create a safe opening. Just make sure everyone sticks to the trees when dragging. The last thing you want is to back up into all of those enemies that you spent so much time meticulously bypassing. But once the 5th switch is taken care of, the bridge opens and you're ready to fight the first boss. First, run up to the Forgotten Sentinel to activate him, and the bridge that you crossed will slowly submerge into pure evil, sectioning you off from the rest of the dungeon, making this your first point of no return. If you've kept it clean, you'll have plenty of time to cross, but if the bridge closes while you're still on it, you'll become immobilized and get disconnected.
Oh man.
In the battle arena, there are 4 more Titanum towers and 2 Paladin obelisks in a set arrangement. All 6 of these towers need to be destroyed. Upon activation, the towers will unleash a stream of interconnecting bullets that form a grid.
I must dive into grid.
Do not walk through these streams. They do 250 apiece and move in quick succession. You will die. There will be that one guy that tries to tell you, nah man, you just gotta be quick, I've done it before. No. Get out of my house. Very similar to Besnut Geb in the Tomb of the Ancients, there is a particular order to how these towers are activated and destroyed. From my understanding, all 4 Titanums can be activated at the same time if a player is close enough to them. However, I can't confirm that because I've never tried it. More importantly though, there's not really a reason to do that. Even in Black Bullet's speedrun, where they have more than enough damage, they took the towers out one by one, so I'm gonna go on a whim and say that's probably how it should be done. Depending on your screen rotation, the map will look different, so I'll be using the image from Realm Eye that we can all use as reference. You may have heard people say that the first boss is the hardest to solo. That's mainly because without sufficient damage, you'll end up with a lot more enemies spawning from the towers than you would normally. With enough damage though, it can be the easiest. You want to start at the left and finish at the bottom right. As a general tip, it really helps to have someone stand in the safe spot. This way, whenever the Stone Knights and Mages are summoned, you can remain still and lure their attention away from the rest of the group who is focusing on killing the tower. With enough DPS, it's very possible to destroy the second Titanum in the same phase, and then proceed to kill the 2 Paladin obelisks, but it's more likely that you'll only be able to kill 1 tower per phase. Once enemies are spawned, the stream of white bullets will stop for a bit, giving you room to move around, but it will start back up pretty soon, so make a good use of your time. If you kill the first Titanum pretty quickly, then you can skip the second one and go straight to the first Paladin obelisk. If not, then that's totally fine, just go back to the second tower when the phase picks back up and proceed normally. When you defeat the first obelisk, you can try and kill the second one, and if you do, that's great, but if not, then head down to the bottom left to kill the third Titanum when it becomes vulnerable. You can proceed to the 4th tower afterwards if you'd like, but when all 4 Titanums are gone, the boss will enter its first phase and start shooting. Meaning, if you leave any obelisks alive, you'll have to juggle it alongside the boss's shots, which isn't ideal. When all 6 towers are taken care of, run to the left of the Guardian. This is where the majority, if not the entire fight, will take place, because by standing off to the side, you can avoid almost all of the Guardian's attacks. There is one stray bullet that can't be avoided, so you'll want to have a melee at the top to tank it for the team. That was a lot of tease. The Sentinel will periodically become vulnerable but never changes up his attacks, so you're standing in one spot for most of the fight. The only time this changes is when he says consume. Dark purple blobs called blow bombs will begin spawning all around the room and converge on your location. With a large group, these can easily be killed before causing any harm, but with few people, you won't be able to take on the sheer number of them. This is a problem because when blow bombs get close to a player, they flash for a moment and then explode into an array of no less than 40 shots, all dealing 100 damage, totaling at 4,000. It's not good. This is where having a dragger comes in. Have one person stray away from the group to draw aggro to all of the blow bombs and keep them away from the group so that your teammates can damage the boss without any trouble. Now, this is a lot easier said than done because dragging is somewhat of an art form. It's comparable to rushing in that it can't be directly taught, but it can be learned by doing. It's something you have to experience for yourself to fully understand. You need to consistently check on the group to drag away any blow bombs to the back of the room while also keeping yourself alive. I highly recommend using a character with maxed speed or an ability with speedy like a warrior. And it's okay if a couple blow bombs slip through the cracks. A small group can handle it. If you don't feel comfortable dragging, you can be one of the guys that stays back to damage the boss and kill any stray blow bombs. When enough damage is dealt, the Sentinel says his final words and a chest spawns in the center. For those who don't know, test chests are stationary objects where all of your soulbound damage is calculated. Yeah, you don't actually get loot from from killing the boss, and the soulbound threshold for these chests is really low. I've done maybe 500 damage and still managed to get loot, so don't sweat it if you don't have a high DPS character when it comes to getting loot. It's pretty much the luck of the draw. If you get a drop, the Shatters does not disappoint. Usually. You can get old tops, wine cellar tops, tier 6 unbound rings, an attack, defense, and the glorious Bracer of the Guardian white bag. One of my favorite accessory items, period. It's so cool and good and... well, that's really it. 60 health and mana and 6 attack and defense. A healthy balance of defense and offense. Unfortunately, while the loot itself is great, getting the loot is where the problem lies. Chests are really fickle when it comes to this. You'll bring the same class with the same group of people, but you will never be sure if you're gonna get a drop, not unless you're soloing or duoing. Afterwards, you'll continue forward across the extended bridge into the stone ruins. Visually speaking, this is my favorite part of the Shatters. I really enjoy carefully navigating through these narrow corridors that appear to have been long forgotten. You don't know what mystical terrors lurk around every corner, and it gives off a subtle intensity that I can't get enough of. Like before, we need to destroy 3 switches to create a bridge to the second boss. Think of this main area like your hub world, and the 3 passageways are like levels. Like the courtyard though, you don't want to run through the middle and draw aggro to all of the enemies lying in wait. You do, however, want to drag the enemies from the left. You can get the mages stuck on the narrow strips of tiling, making for an easy shot. On your way to first switch, you'll be moving through a series of narrow hallways, occasionally breaking for combat. As a general rule of thumb, dragging enemies back into the hallway will prevent them from dodging your attacks, making for an easy kill. Really, anytime there's a wall nearby, use it to your advantage and make the mages move in a straight line. As the room opens up, you'll happen upon a destructible dirt wall, and this is where you'll see a very common rookie mistake. Players who are new to Shatters will see other players shooting the walls and think, oh, I just gotta shoot the whole thing. No, you only want to shoot down the middle, because there will be stone mages and Titanum towers hiding in the dirt. If you only shoot down the middle, the mage's projectiles will collide with the left and right sides and be unable to hurt you, assuming you don't stand on them. There is an alternate route on the right that you can take, but there's really no reason to, since it takes you to the same destination, only in a more awkward zigzag pattern, so it's usually skipped over. After making a hard right, you'll eventually reach a large, wide open room with a ton of enemies, and depending on the spawns, this can be tricky. If you get a generous clump of enemy types, then you can drag them through the 1 tile wide path that you've created, but if you get a bunch of blue or tower spawns, you're going to want to clear all of the dirt blocks behind you to open up the hallway for more free movement. At that point, it becomes the ultimate drag of backtracking while firing until everything is killed. To save some time though, you can stick to the left of the room and kill the switch at an angle, or you can have a highly skilled trickster teleport in and finish the job. Tricksters in general are great due to their snappy mobility. It helps when you get yourself in a tight pinch. When the switch is dead, back out the way you came and head up to the second switch. There will be a group of enemies just before the entrance that will need to be cleared, but because of the broken terrain, it forces you to get really close to the center spawn while crossing. So if you don't think your group is coordinated enough, you can clear out the middle before moving forward and save yourself the stress. The pathway to second switch is pretty straightforward. It's the easiest of the 3 in my opinion. You move through more hallways, stopping for combat along the way until you reach a large room with the switch at the end. If you have a mystic, you can stasis everything and kill the switch without needing to fight. But if not, it's still a self-explanatory room of dragging 1 by 1. Third switch is where things get interesting. If someone is using a class that can teleport like a trickster or a rogue with planewalker, then to the right of the main entrance you can teleport across a series of platforms to reach what we call secret switch. By killing it, it completely eliminates the need to get third switch. And trust me, that saves a lot of time. If you don't have this luxury, then carefully move along the top of the room and enter the chamber on the right. You'll move through a long winding hallway with some enemies before approaching a huge square room with a ton of spawn points. There are 2 ways of going about this. You can hug the wall on either side of the room and clear the enemies respectively until you curve around to the switch, or you can gently move down the middle, dragging enemies until you have a clear shot for a ranged class to attack. The effectiveness of these strategies is very much determined by the spawns that you get, and how well the group can execute them. When that third switch is dead, the bridge to the second boss begins to materialize, and you're ready to cross. Say hello to the Twilight Archmage. Before activation, there are 2 Glacier and Flame Archmages that need to be killed, a task that you should be well acquainted with by now. When the Twilight Archmage wakes up, the bridge will close behind you like before, locking you in. As he ponders how to kill you, the Archmage will become vulnerable, and with enough damage, you can actually push him into his second phase, skipping the first one entirely. If that's not the case, don't sweat it, just do as much damage as you can, and the Archmage will enter phase 1 with either a fire or an ice attack, and alternate between the 2. You've probably noticed all the black wheels flying around by now. They're continually spawned by the 6 generators around the room, and and they hit for 350 apiece. Needless to say, it can get pretty hectic. If you haven't Nexus'd yet, you probably will here. His fire attacks are made up of fire bombs scattered across the floor, a fire portal, and a stream of flames being emitted in front of his body. The bombs are no problem since they give a fair warning before detonating, but the fire portals need to be focused. You can't afford to get confused with those cogs flying around. Whether you have a knight who can stun the portal or ranged classes to take it out from afar, melees will need to get close. I should also mention that all 3 Shatters bosses are immune to stun and paralyze, so to avoid getting hit by the flames, you'll need to goad the Archmage's attacks into a different direction by moving left and right. It's not foolproof, but it is rather effective. He also has a very brief vulnerability period, so if you're not paying attention, you could miss it, making the fight take longer than necessary. The secondary ice attack is made up of an ice portal, which we've established is much easier to kill, and a giant ice sphere. Don't worry though, it's nowhere near as dangerous as a regular one. It's slow, easy to read, and does much less damage. Although its death animation is the same, so avoid that at all costs. It will occasionally try to jump on you in true Ice Sphere fashion, but it spends most of its time circling the Archmage. He'll continue alternating between these 2 fire and ice attacks until enough damage has been dealt. Once that happens, he'll exclaim, "You leave me no choice. Inferno, Blizzard," and 2 birds will be summoned, one being fire and the other ice. They both have some pretty erratic patterns that really drive home the bullet hell motif, and their bullets inflict the same status effects that we've seen before: unstable and quiet for red, and slow and sick for blue. Inferno will circle around Blizzard, and since he's the most aggressive, you want to kill him first. Every now and then, the 2 birds will come towards the nearest player, which can be really dangerous if you're backed up into a corner with no way to escape, but as long as you keep on the move, that shouldn't happen. I should also mention that the Archmage itself doesn't attack at all during this phase, so you don't need to worry about him for now. More importantly though, the generators stop shooting the wheels during phase 2, which makes this battle 100 times more forgiving. A helpful tip is that you can stasis Blizzard and stun Inferno, so you'll be able to focus all of your attention on one bird and not have to worry about either one attacking you. Once Inferno is out, Blizzard becomes a sitting duck. Bide your time and do damage accordingly. After both birds are defeated, the Archmage turns to a shade of turquoise similar to an ice sphere, and the generators boot back up, much to our dismay. He'll then revert back to his original color and move towards the middle right generator. This is your chance to deal damage. In fact, it's imperative that you do as much as you can now, because after a few moments, the Archmage will destroy the generator to consume its power and unleash a huge radial burst of 5 attacks that will kill you. To be fair, they are rather easy to dodge, except for these blue quiet waves. I always get hit by them. But the boss becomes fairly unreachable during this time. After he's had his fill, he'll move to the following generator and repeat this process until he's either killed or he runs out of generators. Now, you may be asking, why not destroy all of the generators beforehand and remove his power source? Well, the problem there is that when there are no more generators to go to, the Archmage enters his rage phase, a form that you really don't need to see. Generally, the group will have enough damage to finish him off within a couple of generators, but with low DPS characters, it's just not gonna cut it. And that's mainly an issue because he starts healing himself later for 10,000 health. God, why don't you launch a Kickstarter while you're at it? If you make it to rage, it's not as hard as you might think it is, but it's definitely not easier. He turns red and starts freaking out. He'll then spawn 2 giant ice spheres and I believe up to 3 or 4 fire portals. However, the Archmage itself doesn't attack again, so you're gonna want to focus the fire portals as usual while remaining out of the ice sphere's range, and then try to get a clear shot of the Archmage before he summons more. Pushing him into a corner will improve your accuracy, but above all, having ranged classes will make this go by so much faster. It is possible on a melee. I almost soloed it on my Paladin until things went downhill, but under normal circumstances, you're not going to see rage more than a few times. When sufficient damage is done, he'll flash red for a while before exploding into 12 unstable shuriken that hit for 100, and the chest will spawn simultaneously. The loot is largely the same across all 3 Shatters bosses with a few changes. Here we have the ST Ancient Spell Pierce, arguably the best spell in the game, and the unremarkable Robe of Twilight. A mana is the potion of choice rather than defense and attack, a proof of concept that Shatters loot increases in value as the dungeon progresses. The white bag contains the Twilight Gemstone, the only Shatters white that I've got so far. It has trace elements of a pyramid and sphinx ring with a large amount of mana, speed, and defense. It's really good. Congratulations for making it this far. You're now at the home stretch, but it won't be easy. There are an absurd number of enemy encounters waiting for you. On the flip side, the area leading up to the final boss is ironically the simplest of them all. There are no switches, it's mainly a straight line with a left and right turn here and there. You'll move through a wide stone hallway with enemies you should should be very familiar with by now until you reach a large room filled with not lava, but magma, a harder hitting form of lava, so don't think you can run through it like you would in the Abyss of Demons. On a side note, I really like the way this room is set up. Not because it's hard or anything, but it's different. No other spots in the Shatters have this structure of narrow broken terrain that you have to carefully walk across, and I find it to be pretty eye-catching. I'd like to see more. After crossing, you'll walk through another wide stone hallway before it opens up into the final road. There are two ways you can do this. You can clear all the way up to the boss, which is what will probably happen, or you can do what we call lava walking. With enough healing classes, you can keep everyone alive while slowly moving through the magma and hugging the right wall as a group. This will allow you to bypass every enemy spawn on the main road and go straight to the boss. Just make sure you stick to the wall. If you go too far left, you might drag a mage into the magma with you, and that's not a fun time. Unfortunately, lava walking is completely dictated by how many priests there are and what level their pets are. I think a priest with a divine pet can keep an entire group alive. If not, then 2 should be enough, but I'm not entirely sure on that. When it comes to clearing the bridge, there aren't any strategies specific to the area that I can give. It's more of the same. Drag enemies one by one, only this time there are little to no walls to use in your favor, and you're surrounded by magma, some of which is required to walk across. There is a trick at the very top. When the bridge widens, you can move along the right side and bypass the final spawn. There might be one enemy that you'll have to drag, but that's about it. Whether lava walking or clearing, when you cross that bridge, it's time for the final showdown, the Forgotten King. The final battle arena is made up of familiarly colored tiles and a broken stone perimeter with magma seeping in, both of which perfectly complement the tattered throne setting I'm sure they were going for. The crown of the Forgotten King rests in the middle of the room, unable to awaken until the 2 large royal guardians on the left and right sides are dealt with. Damage-wise, they're a force to be reckoned with, but movement-wise, they're pretty simple. They track your position, allowing them to be pulled around the room at your control, and they're not immune to any status effects, making knights and archers turn them into a cakewalk. With low speed, they can be threatening, especially if backed into a corner, but with a level head and good map awareness, they won't be causing any trouble. When they're killed, the bridge behind you will close off for the 3rd time. Unlike before though, you can run through the magma, so you won't be disconnected if you're too slow. Even if you're stuck on the other side with enough health, you can run over and rejoin the group. At this time, the cursed crown will move to the top of the room and transform into the Forgotten King. Now, how you approach this first phase can make it the easiest or the hardest part of the fight. Either way, you'll start by going to the left wall. The king will summon 4 colored crystals, sometimes referred to as gems or gumballs, around him for a few seconds before they attack the nearest player. The safest and very common method is to have a player with an electric pet hang in the corner and then run around the bend as soon as the crystals come towards him, trapping the pet on the other side, allowing the electricity to take effect, keeping them permanently paralyzed. Then have a ranged class walk off to the side and attack until they're killed. While in this position, fire and ice portals will be thrown over the wall onto your group. You may be able to destroy them before they attack, but if not, just be sure to not sit directly on top of them. Now, if the player runs around the bend premature, then he can end up luring the crystals straight to the group. This doesn't mean instant death. There are even times where the crystals can get dragged outside of the stage borders, and if it's the green or yellow one, they won't be able to hurt you. But you'll still need to find a way to damage them through either an ability that goes over walls or by luring them back to the arena. If neither of these events occur because no one has an electric pet, then welcome to the hardest part of the dungeon. All 4 crystals serve a purpose. Green heals the others, red and blue summon fire and ice portals respectively, and yellow has 5 150 damage paralyzed shots that fire at an uncomfortably rapid rate. Needless to say, yellow is what you will want to focus first because it's the only one that poses an urgent threat. However, with the fire and ice portals, you can't move around the entire room at all times, and it won't take long for this phase to become complete chaos. On the plus side, all 4 crystals are not immune to any status effects. Whether it be stun, paralyze, or stasis, you can make this fight 10 times easier by isolating the crystals. If you don't have such luxuries and can only rely on your weapon and 2 feet, then it becomes a battle of reflexes. From what I've seen, the yellow crystal's attacks are on a slight delay, meaning as long as you run with and away from its shots, you'll never come into contact with them. You can use this as a means of dragging it in a circle, keeping it isolated in a corner away from the rest of the group who's focusing on the other 3. If you can't control those 2 variables, then your dodging is gonna have to get good. Strategy is taken out of the equation and is replaced with instinct and intuition, your ability to react appropriately at a moment's notice. It's the best advice I can give. After the crystals are killed, the king becomes vulnerable before the next phase. However, you're gonna want to refrain from attacking him because if too much damage is done, you will buff the king and he'll be pushed into a form of rage, which I won't be covering because how the Forgotten King's rage is not something you should ever see. It's not like the Twilight Archmage where if you're lacking DPS, you might have to do it. No, every player combination out there can avoid it through ceasefire. The only time someone would buff the king is if their brain is missing or they want to make people Nexus. George covers it in his guide, and I'm sure once you get the hang of it, it's not that bad. But I've never had to do it before, so I can't speak from experience, and chances are you're never gonna see it. 99% of the time, the fight will go as planned, and the king will do his standard attack, which can be thoroughly avoided by hugging the same left wall. Afterwards, he'll move to the center and summon 7 junior royal guardians who, unlike their larger counterparts, don't move around the room. They circle the king at all times, albeit at varying distances. This phase is more tedious than dangerous, I find. The guardians have a lot of health, you'll be spending a lot of your time dodging, and if you don't push him into his next phase when the guardians are dead, which can be tough for melees due to their very cluttered attack pattern, you'll summon the guardians back and you'll have to do it again. Great, who needs fun? With a decent group though, that shouldn't happen. Next is the tentacle phase, probably the most iconic one. It's my personal favorite. Fun fact, if you're a huntress and you throw a paralyzed trap on the king, it'll skip the entire phase. Neat. But for the rest of us, tentacle phase is actually pretty fun. 6 streams of fireballs that take the form of tentacles will move clockwise around the room, forcing everyone to move along. It is possible to run through, but each bullet does 120 damage, and who knows how many you'll hit during the crossover, so brace yourself. Magma will start filling in small patches around the room too, but it's more of a quick scare as you can easily move out of the way. Meanwhile, helpless souls will begin slowly piling in through the sides and try to get close to you and explode. They do a very small amount of damage with basic defense, but the sick and bleeding can be a nasty combination. Just don't let a bunch pile up and destroy them before they get too close. The tentacles then stop for a moment only to start up again with an extra attack aimed at the nearest player. From what I can tell, there is a safe spot, but trying to position yourself in it is dangerous because of the speed at which the tentacles move. I'd recommend having someone act as a diversion to lure the attack and let the other players damage from the other side. This process will repeat until sufficient damage is dealt. Also, similar to the Ice Cave boss, I guess you can do the required damage to start tentacle phase at the same time the king summons more guardians, at which point you'll have a combination of the 2 phases at once? Yeah, good luck. After tentacle phase is done, the king will move back to the top of the room to start his next attack. While he's doing this, please don't slow him. If you do, he'll stop before reaching the back wall, and it makes it so much harder. You may have heard the phrase, "don't slow the king." This is what we're talking about. Phase 4 is a peculiar one. If you stand directly behind him in between the gold and green tiles, his shots will miss you entirely. It might look like a pixel-perfect trick, but it's actually pretty lenient. Once you try it for the first time, it'll feel like second nature, and trust me, it's way easier than doing this part normally. The helpless souls are back, and now there's nowhere to run, but as long as you clear them out before they stack up, they shouldn't be a threat. Have everybody stand in the safe spot so that you can maximize your damage. When the king yells, you test the patience of a god, run to the very bottom of the room and wait for him to say, "Ha, ha." Technically, the king is attacking during this time in his final phase, but because you're so far away, the shots don't even register. That, or he doesn't detect any players nearby, so he just doesn't shoot at all. Either way, you're safe. There are some more helpless souls to take on, but that shouldn't be anything new by now. After he says haha, run up to him and attack until he either dies or flashes red, at which point you'll run back down to the bottom and repeat. His death animation is very Ice Sphere-like, so don't get too close, even though the battle is over. Although sometimes he'll flat out disappear without a trace, don't know what causes that. The chest drops everything from before, plus the Sentient Staff, a life potion, and the elusive Forgotten Crown, a fantastic offensive item. 110 health, 6 attack, and 6 dexterity. With all of that being said, that is the Shatters, a dungeon that I didn't have much appreciation for just under a year ago, but after completing several of them with my guild and taking a closer look, it's easily become one of my favorites. It's visually and mechanically unique, it's challenging but has a lot of little tricks that can be learned to make it possible, and it has a worthwhile reward. My only complaint would be that in a small group, the risk tends to outweigh the reward. In a shorter amount of time, I could complete a Tomb of the Ancients and get a possible 3 life instead of 1, plus some fairly common and useful white bag rings. Other than that, I love it. And take it from a guy who knew next to nothing about this dungeon just half a year ago. If you're struggling, take a moment to understand what you're doing. Knowing the information is one thing, but executing it is another. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. Alright, see ya.
Is something troubling you, Talwar?
Don't give me that. I know you're behind this. Why am I here? I made the Haunted Cemetery guide on Halloween. I surpassed and eliminated Spencer. I even made your precious Shatters guide, something that no one thought would happen. I'm free.
Yes, all of that is very true, Talwar. However, in the time that it's taken for you to complete these tasks, a new assignment has been given to you.
What do you mean?
Perhaps it's better if I show you.
No.
I'm sorry, but until you finish this, you're not going anywhere.